Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, Marine Corps veteran and host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff at the Texas Veterans Land Board. Here on the Next Gen Warrior Show, we are proud to have a mission that promotes veterans' success stories, discusses personal and professional development after taking off the uniform, and encourages veterans to continue to lead and serve in their communities after leaving the military. Please follow us on your social media platforms as well as podcasting platforms by typing in @Voices of Vets. We would love for you to join us to hear these stories weekly, to share his story, as well as a book he has recently written from the great state of New York is Scotty Alpaugh, Army veteran, currently working in the finance industry, and the proud author of an incredible book called Have No Fear, There's Always Fucking Next Year, a COVID tale. Scotty, great to have you on the show today. How are you?
Good, thank you, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump into 2020, before we jump into military transition and life after taking off the uniform, tell us a little bit about where you served and when you served.
Sure. So first of all, I graduated from West Point in 2003. And then I was stationed in Savannah, Georgia with the 3rd Infantry Division. I was a field artillery officer and then wound up serving overseas in Eastern Baghdad.
Your time in the military, how did it prepare you for military transition, or how would I say it is how unfamiliar was it when you got out of the military, when you started looking for your first job?
Sure. I think the military prepares you pretty good for the situations you find yourself in your future civilian life and in your military life. But what I don't think it does very well, at least when I was in it, was prepare me for what I should be doing when I left military service, how to get assistance when I need it, how to get veterans benefits, how to talk about disability, vocational rehab. If I'm honest, I felt fairly unprepared at the time.
We were talking before we started recording here about the battle that you had with the VA. That's, I think, a fairly common theme, although I think the processes and procedures hopefully have improved and gotten better. When veterans were getting out, specifically when you got out in 2008, 2009, 2010, there were a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of bureaucratic red tape, and a lot of frustration by veterans feeling like they were not getting the care that they deserved. You were injured while you were deployed, and then while coming back and trying to reacclimate to civilian society, trying to find a job, you were also fighting a battle with the VA. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was absolutely fighting a battle with the VA. When I came home, I was injured overseas during my combat tour. Came home, was medically discharged from the military, got a disability rating, and then eventually had to have a second surgery associated with the injury that I had. And the unfortunate reality was after that surgery, I got a bill in the mail for $50,000 from the Veterans Hospital. Now, you should know I was employed fully, had full health insurance. I went to the Veterans Hospital because I thought that they had a great doctor there. And I also thought that it would be free associated with my disability rating, associated with my medical discharge. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Let's put it that way.
So Scotty, let me ask you about this. Getting out of the military, you're back in New York and you're looking to start your career, which is much different than the industry that you're in now, which is finance. You are dealing with a leg injury as well as kind of battling with the VA. Tell us about the first job that you got. Tell us about how you found it and how you kind of used that job. Maybe even if you didn't love it, how you used it to set yourself up in the future.
Sure. My first job was working for the power company for Manhattan. I worked in Brooklyn. I thought it was a fantastic job. I really actually enjoy it. Sometimes I still wish I did it, but I managed union members in the underground electrical services. And so I managed, 4 teams that worked in Manhattan's manholes. It was a great job. The way I found it was through a military job hiring conference. At that time, it was very close to, I mean, the war was kind of in its main portions. And so the view of veterans and hiring veterans was a good one. So I had a great opportunity to join them, and really enjoyed it. I think while I was there, I realized that, that it wasn't something I wanted to do forever. I really enjoyed it, but
How long did that take you to come to that point?
I was there a couple years. And I really enjoyed it, but what happens there is you go kind of just very small steps up from a responsibility perspective. And then after 10 years, there's like a bigger jump. And I wanted to be in an industry that I considered more of a meritocracy. And
Yeah.
so that if I overperformed, I could jump quicker. And that's kind of how I set my sights on finance. I didn't know anything about finance. And I think a lot of veterans I interview a lot of veterans and they're kind of
Yeah.
like, I want to get into finance. And I think everybody just thinks they want to make money and that's where the money is, which there's less money than there ever was before. But I think that's why a lot of veterans want to get into finance. And I mean, for me, it interested in me. I was interested in it, and I knew it was a meritocracy, and I knew it was a good place to make money at the time. And so somewhere in between there, while I was working at Con Edison, I started going to business school, and applied. And I mentioned this to you previously. I applied for vocational rehab, and yet again, a place where I found it very difficult to kind of navigate the system. I was told, which was blatantly wrong information, that based on my disability levels, I wasn't eligible for vocational rehab. And so I paid for my own business school for a portion of time.
So I would like to come back to that kind of transition from underground utilities and then moving into the finance industry, and the difference of not just necessarily what the industry was, but actually the meritocracy and kind of how you approach your how to use your skills best, which I think is really important for veterans to understand and realize after they've spent a little bit of time out of the military. But you just hit on something that's really important, is veteran hiring. And I kind of just want to ask you what you see from veterans who come in to talk with you. If maybe you could just give us a broad overview, whether they're primarily enlisted, whether they are officers, and maybe some of the best takeaways and maybe some of the worst takeaways.
Yeah, I see a mix. I do see a lot of officers. I do see a lot of academy grads. I would say I also see an odd amount of special, whether it's special forces or Navy SEALs. I see quite a few of those as well, but I see enlisted as well. There's a bunch of different things like a bunch of different organizations that help feed those interviews, whether it's Veterans on Wall Street or VAPS. So all those kind of things feed into these organizations. So I see a broad kind of bell curve of individuals.
Yeah.
What I would tell you is that I think that most people come in, like I mentioned, wanting to make money and thinking that's the spot. And I would say almost 90% say they want to be investment bankers, which is kind of like being a plebe at West Point. And I don't know why anybody would want to be that. I mean, it's a great job in the long run. But again, everyone on Wall Street is making less money, and it's like going back to basic and starting all over. But I think what people need to do a better job of is really thinking about and having an open mind, and how they cater themselves to that opportunity set. There's always another veteran in line to get a job in Wall Street. For me, the way that I differentiated myself during those interviews was telling a story. I'm very good at telling a story. I'm a salesperson in my role and a relationship manager. And so I'm very good at putting a story together and giving a pitch in a succinct manner and changing that for the environment or individual I'm in front of.
Is that a learned skill, or is that something that comes natural?
I definitely practice that skill. I definitely think it's a learned skill, but if you realize who's interviewing you and you know how to deal with people on a daily basis, like where to be more aggressive or where someone wants to talk about themselves and allowing them to talk about themselves and playing to the environment you're in, I think that's a skill that you learn over time, but it's definitely something that you can harness sooner than later. And then, the game is differentiation, right?
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
made myself a very memorable person because when I interviewed for these jobs, I was like, listen, I don't know anything about finance. I'm in business school and I'm learning, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know what this job is about. I'm going to sit here and tell you that I didn't know anything about the military when I got into it. I didn't know anything. I was a field artillery officer, and then I was given an EOD group,
Mm.
and was a security force for Baghdad, for the Baghdad EOD team. I didn't know anything about that, and I seemed to do it okay. I joined, the power company, and within a couple of years, I was the highest producing supervisor. I didn't know anything about electricity. And so why can't I kept asking that question. Why do you
Yeah.
think I can't do that same thing here? And if I can't, well, you have all the mechanisms in place, and I would encourage you to fire me because that is what I believe. That's how I believe in myself.
So there is a huge difference, right, between somebody who is in a position and says, hey, I see this role or I see this industry. You interview for the position and then you get the job, right? So now you find yourself in the finance industry. And as you talked about, veterans who want to become investment bankers, and then you get there and you go, oh, maybe this isn't, all chalked up to what I thought it was going to be. Talk to us about your career in finance. Obviously, the nature of work has changed tremendously over the last year or two, where people are able to work remotely, especially in finance. And here, being in Austin and being in Texas, and watching news and seeing kind of the discussions around whether it's the banking industry and bringing people back to work, or do we let people work from home? Talk to us about your level of productivity once you got into the finance industry, how quickly you learned it, how quickly you learned those skills, and then how you think the nature of work has changed for you over the last year or two.
Sure. So the first thing I want to mention is I didn't interview and get a job. I
Right.
interviewed very well. And then I basically networked myself and then got an interview. And then I interviewed, like I mentioned, I was like, listen, I can figure this out. I promise you that. I figured out all these other things. And I promise you there will be very few people who work as hard as I do. When that happened, 2 weeks after, they were talking about finding me a job. The market crash happened in 08, 09. And this is how little I knew about finance. I was like, hey, why is it taking you guys so long to get back to me? Okay. And so they actually called me a year later and then hired me. I guess the moral of that story is do not give up. Do not stop chasing. Do not stop putting your foot in the door and saying, hey, listen, I'm still here. When you're ready, I'm here. So my transition into finance, first I took an operations job. And again, I took a job to get my foot in the door because once I knew I had my foot in the door, I could show people that I was unlike other people they hired, that I would overperform even on the smallest tasks. And I use a mantra that I had in the military, and that's every good leader has to fill a sandbag, right?
Yeah.
If you have to know what it's like, and you have to participate with your soldiers or with your subordinates so that you know what it's like to be them so that you can lead them properly, right? It's followership and leadership. And so starting at this bottom at the bottom rung of this totem pole, I just tried as hard as I could. It was a very tough environment because a lot of people were getting laid off because of the financial crisis. But effectively, I started in ops, moved to sales, and then eventually ran a sales team for the US. And now I have a little bit of a different role. What I would tell you is it wasn't the easiest. It wasn't the easiest transition all the time because moving from the military to an industrial workforce, working with union people in Brooklyn, and then working in finance, it's definitely a different environment. So the way you present yourself is different, right? I went from wearing a uniform to a fire retardant uniform to a suit. And there's different things you can do and say. And I will tell you, I'll be honest with you, like I'm a very direct person and I was not polished when I joined. And You Get More Bees with Honey appeared on my review for years and years because I didn't understand why we couldn't be as direct as possible. Now, I'm
Yeah.
still direct, I'm still myself, but I've definitely polished that directness and made it much more socially acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of military transition is learning the customs and courtesies, right? Same thing, when you join the Marine Corps, you go to boot camp, you have to learn the customs and courtesies of the Marine Corps. But to some degree, you depending on your workplace, maybe you have to unlearn some of those as well in order to be successful. And I think that's something that I try to tell veterans, and I think I did it myself, is like trying to hang on to my military identity. I didn't want to lose it. I still wanted to be that guy. But at the same time, it's like the people around you in your office didn't join the Marine Corps. You joined civilian life, and
Yeah.
you gotta figure out how to fit into their world, because they're not at Camp Pendleton. They're not at Fort Hood. They're not at West Point. You're working in their industry. You're working in their field, and they have more experience. But I think that lesson that you were talking about comes with a little bit of humility and self-awareness, which can take some time to grow.
Absolutely. And I think there's two things that really helped me in that transition. One, I didn't jump right into finance.
Hmm.
All right. So I had this transition period, which the job at the power company was a fantastic job. And it helped me readjust. It also, I think a lot of soldiers have post-traumatic stress syndrome associated with a lack of adrenaline. I think when you are in the situations we find ourselves in during wartime, and you then come back and like try to put together electric, underground electricity, or try and figure out trade breaks in a financial institution, I think you'll find yourself buzzing for, a heartbeat. For me to be in an industrial injury, to see manhole fires, to see those kind of things, made me wonder whether I wanted to be a police officer or a fireman, because I was struggling with my transition of adrenaline. I really was struggling with that. And so it was a good break for me to move into finance. And it really helped with that transition. But you're absolutely right. You have to cater to those worlds. Now, the interesting thing is that you're in their world. And this is what I tell everyone on their interviews and as they're networking themselves is, right, you have to be good at telling those stories. People are hiring you because they're a veteran. They want your stories. You have to figure out what your story is and what you're comfortable sharing, right? So like if you were overseas, what story are you comfortable boxing up and sharing with other people? What level of that story of your experiences overseas, what level of warfare or funny stories associated with the military are you willing to share? And then polishing those stories, because that's what sets you apart.
Sure.
Not only your knowledge, skills, and ability, but who you are is your pitch. I mean, that's your pitch, right? You were a Marine, and this is what I did. I was in the military. I was overseas during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Here's what I'm comfortable sharing.
So I'm interested to fast forward a little bit and maybe talk about the last year or so, because the book that you wrote is specifically about your life during COVID, especially with your family. One, tell us how you came up with the idea for the book. I know you talked about being a storyteller, and that's something that you're good at, and maybe it comes naturally. But there is a difference, right, between being a storyteller and being a writer.
Yeah.
So what was kind of the light bulb moment for this?
So listen, like I said, I start things that I have no business getting involved in. And I did a previous podcast with my college roommate, and he was like, to his listeners, he wanted to stress one thing. And, he doesn't care whether I was comfortable or not, but I'm totally comfortable in my own skin. He was like, what I want to tell you listeners is that anything is possible, because this kid is the worst English student I have ever met in my entire life. And he told a story about a paper I wrote, which is, I still have trouble writing emails. I sometimes put Google images in them to distract people, even in finance, from how poorly they are written. So don't go thinking that I was like, slinging poetry on the side and just wrote a book. So, my life has been filled with, and I'm not going to say my life is the most challenged life. It definitely isn't, but it's been filled with challenges that have reminded me of a theme. the war was a challenge. West Point was a challenge. I went through a divorce with a small child. That was a huge challenge. We talked about some of the challenges with the VA, and my reintegration into society. I've been diagnosed with cancer, fighting that, and I've had other challenges in my life. And COVID was another reminder of the fact that this life, and I think a lot of people who have been in the war realize that this is a very precious thing. I mean, it can end in an instant.
Yeah.
And so your choice is to focus on those instants and make sure that you're maximizing your output. And when things are super negative, either, getting lost in the minutia of the negativity, or really grabbing the positivity and changing the narrative. And I'm not saying, like, listen, these last few years have been politically horrendous. We've lost a tremendous amount of life. Close people from our family and in our family have passed. There's been a tremendous amount of racial injustice. It's just been a tough years. But what I will tell you, I'm not saying that all that goes away and you take those lemons and make lemonade. I think that's disingenuous. What I'm saying is that I said, you're right, this does suck, but these are all the 5 things we can focus on and really enjoy this. And so when you talk about the change in my life, I was spending more time at home with my wife. In the past, I was commuting to the city an hour and a half each way. That's 15 hours a week. And my kids go to bed at 7:30 because I run an incredibly military household. And so I was getting home and they were asleep and I was leaving before they were awake. So I was basically just a guy hanging out on the weekend. Now I'm home having coffee with my wife in the morning, seeing her every day, having a discussion, enjoying our marriage, seeing my kids off to school, seeing them here, helping them virtually learn. I saw the positivity in that. And so I talked to my wife about writing a book about a dad who was more present from a child's view, from his son's view, like who was helping him ride his bike and doing all these things with him he was never around to do. And effectively what happened was I went to bed one night, had a dream that I wrote that book, but it was a 2-book series. And the other book was the book that I wrote, which is a profanity filled, very short children's book for adults only, about making fun of my experience of COVID and making people laugh, because it was like, it's the parenting, it's the virtual school, it's I'm going to tear my heads out. Like, I love my kids, but now I'm around them all the time. What am I going to do? I can't see people. I can't go to the grocery store. I can't go to the gym. And so, I woke up that morning and was like, hey, I just started scribbling and threw this book together, and it was an incredibly positive experience. And I started reading it to people, and people who were down started laughing. And I was like, look, this is something here. And I think it kind of defines how I deal with issues. I'm not making fun of what happened. I'm just trying to laugh, trying to give some people some positivity, share my story, and find a silver lining in a situation. Because I can tell you, as a father, I'm better. I spent more time with my daughter, who's from who the majority of the time lives with her mother. I got to spend an unbelievable amount of time with her. My relationship's better. I wrote a book, and the world that I'm living in right now is so much more flexible, virtual. It's just been a revelation for me.
How long do you think it took you to realize that maybe the right word isn't things were going to be okay, but that there were healthy things that could come out of a difficult situation?
See, that's the trick with me. And I know I'm an outlier here. Probably like 30 minutes.
Fast, huh?
I mean, I'm kind of like I pivot very quickly. And I think this is a positive and negative that I think a lot of veterans deal with. If you've been in the war, you have to take all of your feelings and kind of put them in a box and keep, because you have to go to work 2 seconds after something horrible happens, right? And so you have to put those feelings in a box, and sometimes that box can explode and it's a bad situation. And I think what happens is you become after those experiences, you become a little less emotionally responsive. When people tell you they're stressed out, you're like, really, this is stress to you?
Yeah.
And I know that's an inappropriate thing to say, and it's something that I have to deal with every day. And it's not great when you have a wife. They do not appreciate that view. But I tend to stop evaluate a situation and say, okay, this is bad. Like, we didn't know how bad it was the first 2 weeks, but soon after that, I was like, wait, what's happening here? Like, I
Yeah.
know this is bad, but we're in our house, we're safe. We're not seeing people. At that point, everybody's like spraying down groceries, and you're like,
Yes.
so I think it was there where I was like, I really started to realize, like, whoa, I'm home. Like, my
Mm.
kids are here. Like, my work is continuing. Um, this could be positive.
We did briefly hit on just the nature of work changing, and I think that's for as a macro. I think we've seen that played out in what people term the Great Resignation and trying to hire people back, whether it's blue collar jobs or whether it's service industry. But the nature of work has really changed just because of what we're able to do right now, which is jump on a video call, talk to somebody who may be a couple time zones away, and get things done. And that also has, as you alluded to, freed up space in our personal lives to develop deeper relationships with our wives or with our children, or maybe even with our friends. Can you talk about how maybe your view of work has changed, or how maybe your value of work within your life has changed?
I would tell you that even before this happened, when I first joined the financial institution I'm a part of now, I had a 1 day work from home schedule because I was going through a divorce and I didn't want to
Mm.
give up time with my daughter. I needed to stake, put a line down in the dirt and say, hey, listen, I need this for me. And they were supportive of that. And because of that, I was always supportive as a leader. So when people asked me for a flexible work schedule, I was always a proponent of that, because as long as you're doing your work, um, what really is the issue there? And if you're
Yeah.
available, what is the issue? And I think people tend to think if you work from home, you can hide. And I actually think it took me about 5 days to realize that that is not the case, because there is no more water cooler talk. So those
Yep.
people who can like snow their leader or their manager by being like, oh, let's go for coffee and do all these things, now they're calling them and is like, hey, is your family safe from COVID? Yes.
Mm.
Cool. What have you done for me lately? And so
Yep.
there's much more direct conversations. And so I think that now more than ever, I my biggest concern right now is that people forget that they just go back to work and they forget what we've got here. They forget what the
Yeah.
lessons we should be learning are, which are, for some people over the course of the last 2 years, things ended in an instant.
Yeah.
So, what are you going to remember at the end of your life? Is it the time with your kids and your wife or your husband? Is it the time with your family? Is it teaching your kids to ride a bike? Or are you going to remember, fixing the electrical grid when you worked for the power company? Like,
Yeah.
those are the things you have to think about. And then you have to design what your future is going to look like. Now, in this new world, companies are going to let you design what your future looks like a lot more,
Hmm.
but you have to be assertive and you have to tell them what you want your future to look like. And I think I've been fairly assertive when it comes to those conversations, and I've encouraged all the younger people and my peers to do the same thing. If you want something, if you want some sort of schedule and you're overperforming or you're performing, then you should be vocalizing that.
Yeah. Do you think that your ability to maybe process negative circumstances, whether you talked about cancer, dealing with the VA, being rejected with, trying to get voc rehab, is this something that has become almost like a muscle memory to you? And do you think that, I guess, at least I would hope, especially for our audience, that you are able to kind of pass that message on to people so that it rubs off in either in your workplace or in the veterans community?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. Like, the reason we're here talking is so that I can share my story.
Yeah.
You have a story, and I'd love to hear it, and I love to hear everybody's story. And that was the book was a reflection of a story. Like, hey, listen, it sucks, no doubt. The book clearly lays that out, but like, let's laugh about it, and let's also see. Don't forget, there's tomorrow. Like, we can do this
Mhm.
again tomorrow. We can take another crack at this. And I think it has created muscle memory. But every time that I've run into one of these situations, instead of me being like, why me?
Mm.
Right? Like, the cancer thing, very easy for me. I never smoked, I never dipped. I actually I tried it in high school, and I was sent to a young athletic leaders conference, and one person who spoke had a mouth cancer and was missing the whole bottom half of their jaw. And I made an active decision never to smoke or dip again. And I had hardly done it at all at that point. And I was like, I never want to get mouth cancer. Fast forward 20 years, I get mouth cancer. Now that is like a tremendous injustice. You could be like, that's like a throw your hands up, the world is against me moment. However, instead I'm like, okay, we caught it early.
Mm-hmm.
And then I blame myself a little bit for losing sight of the fact that I should be maximizing every minute, and that maybe I wasn't focused enough on my family at that time, or focused enough on being a good friend, or focused enough on being a good dad, and that I wasn't cherishing every minute and taking time to sit down and have a cup of coffee. And those are the kind of things that refocus my energy.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about the personal side of work, because I had a conversation yesterday with a veteran out in California, and we just had this conversation about how she has started to prioritize her faith and her fitness in her family. And those things are what fuel her in her work life. Right. And so that keeps her going in the office. That helps her lead her team better. That keeps her, doing that work-life balance. Right. And what I try to tell veterans, and what I try to tell our community, is that balance is so critical. But I do think, and I am slowly beginning to believe, that I hope this doesn't come off in a selfish way, but you do have to prioritize those relationships that you have and your own mental well-being, so that you can perform at a high level in your job and in your workplace.
I will tell you that I perform at a higher level now than I did when I was in work. Part of that is because I'm more organized. Yep. Part of that is because I'm happier as a human. Like, my life is a happier place. Part of that is because the flexibility in time has allowed me to lose, 20 pounds working out, because I never had that time, because I would have rather spent the time working out with my family. And that also jeopardizes, physical health has a multitude of effects on psychological health, mental health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just makes everything better when you're in better physical shape. But those are real things, right? Like, it's a real thing to lose 20 pounds and to be healthier. That's a real life effect. To be a better dad is a real life thing. To be a better husband is a real life thing. When we think about performance at work, like, if you're doing those things and you found what I would call, right, like your spiritual center or your chi, if you found your chi, everything gets better. And I would tell you, I'm performing far better at work from my perspective.
How do you block out distractions?
You mean like in the house? Or, I mean, look, I'm very military in that regard. Like, if I'm going to do something, like, when I was like, I'm going to write a book, I wrote a book. When I'm like, I'm going to get this job, I don't allow there to be, like, a lot of variance in it. If I'm not going to get that job, I'm going to get the next job. So I think a lot of it comes down to determination and just, seeing things through. Like, when I may take a long time to make a decision, but when I make it, I just go in that direction.
So before we conclude here, I want you to tell us where we can find the book. Can we get it online? Can we get it in stores? And sure. I would also love you to give us maybe just a last word for the audience.
Sure. So you can find the book, Have No Fear, There's Always Fucking Next Year, on Amazon. Just put Scotty Alpaugh into the search bar. It's great. It's a great coffee table book. A lot of people have bought like 10 copies and then like left it out around the holidays. The problem is, nobody really came to the holidays the last few years, but a lot of people have like left it out and had people just grab them, because it's a fantastic, like, it's a good laugh, and the pictures are my family, and it's very entertaining. So it can be found on Amazon pretty easy. From a last word perspective, I would say we all have our stories, and I think when we share, there's so much value from that, and we can really learn a lot from each other. And I strongly believe that the world would be a better place if we shared how we were feeling. I think the world right now is in a conundrum of oversharing and under listening. So, like, people from a social media perspective are like telling people what they eat for breakfast. Not that we care, but people do care, and they're going to such a level. And it's in, you can talk about the social dilemma, you can talk about a million different things, but it's really parsing out and grouping people.
Yeah.
People aren't listening. They don't want to hear the other side of an argument because they're being fed so much news, or they're only reading one side of the story or only listening to one side of the story. People don't want to listen. They don't want to have a discussion anymore. They just want to have a fight. And so I think if we were all more thoughtful about sharing and listening, like really sharing what's in us, what our thoughts are and why we're thinking that way, I just think the world would be a lot better place. And then the other thing I would mention is like, listen, you may be in a situation that you think is incredibly difficult to overcome. Just take a step back. Sometimes those situations aren't even that important. Sometimes they're just a resume builder, and sometimes they are difficult. But if you take a minute and soak it in and try and figure out a way forward, or talk to someone about it, you can find a way.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to put your thoughts down on paper and writing a really incredible book that is short. It's fun to read. So if you're out there and you're listening to this, please go on to Amazon, find the book. It's incredible. The illustrations are great, and it will make you laugh. The ability, I think, Scotty, for you to put your experiences down on paper like that and make people feel like they're a part of your family, and also be able to laugh and enjoy themselves during a difficult time is really an incredible skill. And I appreciate you sharing that with our audience and being on the program with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a total pleasure.
On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and our staff at the Texas Veterans Land Board, join us back here next Monday for more discussions on personal and professional development for veterans. Please follow us on @Voices of Vets on your favorite podcasting platforms and social media platforms. We'll see you next week.
Follow us on Instagram @Voices of Vets, on Twitter @Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook Facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior podcast.